All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. My name is Anne from the Keller Library. I'm excited tonight that we have an exciting panel of romance authors here to talk about all things romance. Because this month at the library, we're just doing all sorts of things. We're doing a month-long Valentine's Day. But tonight we're going to focus on them. I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking, except I do want to introduce our moderator for the evening, which is Lindsay Emory. And then I'm going to let her introduce all of the rest of our panelists. But Lindsay is a USA Today bestselling author. She's best known for her series, The Royal Runaway. No, that's the name of the first book. Is it The Royal Series? Or
series? Yes, sure.
But she's also written a murder mystery series, The Sorority Sisters, which I very much enjoyed. And then she also is the host of a very popular podcast, Women with Books. So if you enjoy women authors or books at all, I recommend checking out her podcast. And tonight she's going to be leading our authors in a discussion about romantic literature. So hope you guys enjoy.
Thank you, Anne. I will take it from here, I guess. I'm so pleased to moderate tonight's panel on romantic literature and romance, and I love the idea of a whole month dedicated to romance. Including myself, all of tonight's authors are local to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. We have a large and talented pool of authors in the region, and I want to thank Keller Library for hosting us and shining a spotlight on local authors. We love libraries and we love readers, so this is a perfect event for all of us to get to do together. Before we get started on our discussion, I want to briefly introduce everyone. So when I read your name, I want you to wave and then do this, just in case, okay? All right, so this is in no particular order, and I don't know what order everyone is on the screen, so I'm just going for it. USA Today best-selling author Ophelia London was born and raised among the redwood trees in beautiful Northern California. Once she was fully educated, she decided to settle in Florida, but her car broke down in Texas, and she's lived in Dallas ever since. She enjoys cupcakes, treadmills, rewatches of Dawson's Creek, and obsessing over her Italian Greyhound Peanut. Ophelia is the author of adult, new adult, young adult romance, and Amish romance. And all of those other ones were sweet romances.
So is the Amish one, of course.
Never an Amish Bride is her newest release, and The Amish Cowboys Homecoming is her next book, coming in May 2021. Or should we say
April?
Oh, April?
April.
Oh, it got moved then.
It got moved.
Yay.
Yay. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going about fine. Me. Keep talking.
Yes. I was going to say, perhaps we should say The Amish Cowboys Homecoming is her next book, Homecoming, in April 2021.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Elizabeth Essex is the award-winning author of over 20 critically acclaimed historical romance novels, including Reckless Brides and her new Highland Bride series. Long before she ever set pen to paper, Elizabeth was an underwater archaeologist. Yet she has found her true calling, writing lush, lyrical, historical romances full of passion, daring, and adventure. Elizabeth lives in Texas with her husband, the indispensable Mr. Essex, her beloved dogs, Gilly and Brogue. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
And her exuberant family in an old house filled to the brim with books, as you can see around her. Her next release is a Reckless Brides novella, She Walks in Scandal, in the anthology A Midsummer Night's Romance, out May 2021.
Yes. Hi, thank you for having me. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
Best-selling author Lorraine Heath once wrote training manuals and computer code. But something was always missing, which I've heard is a problem with computer code. When she read a romance novel, she became not only hooked on the genre, but quickly realized that what her writing lacked: rebels, scoundrels, and rogues. She's been writing about them ever since. Her next release is Scoundrel of My Heart, out March 30th. USA Today best-selling author Krystal Shannan lives in a sprawling ranch-style home with her husband, teenage son, and 2 almost teenage daughters. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Her house is filled with love and laughter and lots of animals. In fact, the welcome mat warns visitors that it's a zoo inside. Chickens, rabbits, rats, guinea pigs, dogs, and fish. You name it, they've probably had it in their home at some point. Krystal writes stories filled with magic, fantasy, passion, and just enough humor to make you laugh out loud. Her next release will be April 13th, All's Fair in Lion and War, book 7 in the Soulmate Shifters and Mystery Alaska series.
Thank
And
you.
Actually, that title made me laugh out loud.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here tonight.
Yes, and not last but not least, Roni Loren wrote her first romance novel at age 15 when she discovered writing about boys was way easier than actually talking to them. Since then, her flirting skills haven't improved, but she likes to think her storytelling ability has. She holds a master's degree in social work and spent years as a mental health counselor, but now she writes full-time from her cozy office in Dallas, Texas, where she puts her characters on a therapy couch instead. She is a 2-time Rita Award winner and a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. Her next release is Yes, and I Love You in March 2021. Ooh, and it's got a brilliant cover.
Thanks. Hello, everybody.
Hello, awesome. Well, so we don't have like hours and hours to talk tonight, unfortunately. So I have prepared some questions, and I'll try to make sure that everyone gets to talk, and maybe I'll throw in some more questions if we have enough time.
Lindsay, who are you?
Me?
Who are you?
I think Anne introduced me, but I'm Lindsay Emory.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry. COVID
brain. When Anne first approached me about this panel, we talked about what we could do with it, what kind of, theme we would have it make with it. And we kind of talked about how to address, how huge and diverse romance is and how there's really something for everyone in this genre, between the subgenres and topics.
See, I just have to chime in that you totally just used the hashtag for the library, which is something for everyone. Our library.
I totally planned that. Planned it. I did all that research and decided to work that in. Yeah, so when we were talking about like, okay, well, we'll have, of course, readers of the genre and fans of authors sign up, but we also wanted to put on display, how more people could read romance and be included in romance. And, and then on December 25th, this little show came out on Netflix and 85 million people watched Bridgerton, which was an adaptation of a historical romance series by an author named Julia Quinn. And when that happened, I thought, well, we don't need to have the panel anymore because, 85 million people have been exposed to romance. But, let's still have panels and let's still talk about it. So I thought we'd go around and ask each of you if you watched Bridgerton, and if you think it was a good introduction to the genre and why. Krystal, do you want to go first?
Sure. I did watch it. Not the first day that it came out, but that definitely within a few days. I had watched the whole 8 episodes, I think. I really enjoyed it. I thought for a historical adaptation, it was creative. I liked the direction that she took with it. I thought it was really unique. And the romance was fun. Like they hit the tropes and it was fun. It was a good romp, and I loved the Miss Whistledown, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they go next.
Elizabeth, what do you think? Was it a good introduction to the genre?
Is that Elizabeth? Yes, I loved it, and I loved it as a reimagining, because the different novels and a visual art are so striking to me, but the visual art of the whole series was just so, I mean, it was champagne. It was so lovely. They took all the best parts of the book, the sparkling dialogue, the concentration on the attraction between individuals. And I don't know if everybody knows what tropes are, so I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. Tropes are what romance readers and authors use as the recognizable stories. The recognizable stories are lover enemies, or enemies to lovers. No, it's got to go that way. To lovers. Friends to lovers, secret babies, opposites attract, arranged, and this is what the first Bridgerton has been, was an arranged sort of marriage or an arranged agreement. They pretend to be interested in each other.
Almost like a marriage of convenience. That was almost like a marriage of convenience type.
Yes, they're solving other problems in their lives. And I thought that it was a marvelous adaptation, that it brought new energy to make us all think about as we write new books. I just adored it. I watched it with my daughter sort of simultaneously. She's on the other side of the country, and we watched it together, talking on FaceTime to each other. So we had this marvelous sort of movie theater experience between the two of us, sort of whispering to each other about, oh, yes, I love it. Oh my God, the boxing scene, things like that. We loved it. Nothing I would change. Loved it.
Roni, what do you say about Bridgerton?
I really liked it. I'm always nervous when a book is turned into a show, because I'm like, if I love the book like I loved that, it's like to live up to that and what I had in my head is really hard. But I thought they did a really great job, and I love that so many people have been exposed to romance that way, because this is the first time, CNN contacted me to talk to me about romance and about Bridgerton specifically. And then this past weekend, Saturday Night Live was hosted by the hero from Bridgerton. Like, he was the host. And I'm like, it's getting into the mainstream. So that made me happy. But I thought they did a really great job with it. It was a beautiful show.
Lorraine, you're also a historical romance author. What were your thoughts when Bridgerton hit the airwaves, so to speak?
Yeah, I loved it as well. One of the things that I really liked about it was that they allowed it to be extremely diverse. It had a very diverse cast, which wasn't necessarily found in the books, or aren't always found in the books that are written for that period. And so my hope is that it really broadens things, not only by introducing romance to an audience who might not really be familiar with romance, but by expanding it to make it more inclusive. And I thought they handled it all really well. And as people have said, it was just beautifully done with the costuming and just the Regency period. So I did watch it on the day that it came out. All of it, I binged it, and then I dropped Julia Quinn a note, and I said, so when is the second season? Because I'm ready for that to start. So anyway.
Yeah, Julia owes us. I mean, obviously she's in charge of it.
Right?
Yeah. No, she wasn't. She was like, I don't know. So anyway.
Ophelia, what did you think about Bridgerton? And do you think it's a good intro to the romance genre?
Well, I'm glad I went last because I haven't finished it. I know. Let me tell you.
We all die in a volcano. Spoiler alert.
No, I have a problem with hype.
Okay.
And when something gets too hypey, I kind of shut down. I don't want. Yeah. So anyway, but I've watched the first 2 episodes, and I love what you guys love too. I love the diversity. It's beautiful. I mean, it's so visually beautiful to watch. I love the good people, and there's great villains, and they're all very attractive, which I love also. But my husband wanted to start watching a show with me called Turn on Netflix. It's about
That
the
is also
Revolutionary War.
really good.
Love it.
I haven't finished it, and I don't know my U.S. history, so I don't know how they get Benedict Arnold, but we're on the last episode, so no
don't get it.
spoilers. I forgot my 6th grade history. But anyway, there's some romance in that too, and lots of bosoms and stuff. But anyway, yeah, I'm glad I went last.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm with you sometimes on that hype machine too. Sometimes with Marvel movies and stuff, I'm like, I'm just gonna wait to see that.
Right.
But it's, as Elizabeth said, I think as an author, it was really interesting. I'm always interested in how they adapt books and which pieces they pull out and which pieces they leave behind. And this being a Shonda Rhimes executive produced show, which parts that they thought were going to resonate with a modern conventional audience, such as diversity, such as beautiful scenes and costumes, such as beautifully shot intimacy. And and then to really see like, okay, what do people like, or I should say, what are people responding to on the screen, and what do we put in our books next is an interesting option. Yes, Elizabeth.
That was one of the things that I really loved about it. And what stood out for me was that they did all those visually stimulating things, but one of the big moments was hand touch that they filmed so slowly and beautifully, because that's what romance brings. Those long, intimate moments of perfection. And I was so happy that they captured that, because that's what I want to tell everybody who watched it and loved it, was like, yes, we're all about that moment. Work our books to give you that moment.
And it's funny that you're pointing that out, Elizabeth, because I've talked to you about this before. There's one Elizabeth Essex book where there is not even a hand touch. They're touching through a piece of cloth that, I've told you, I'm like, that is one of my all-time favorite scenes. And it's just 2 people touching, and it's sunk inside my heart, and it's never going to let me go. So you're absolutely right.
You're so sweet. Thank you. Okay, so that was a moment in a book that I wrote about 2 people on a ship called Almost a Scandal. And it is a moment where they recognize the moment of connection between, and no matter what happens, and bad things are going to happen, they sort of commit to being kind and being there for each other in that moment. And it's a pivotal moment in the book, and I loved writing it, and I love that moment. I love that moment in everybody else's book too. It's a moment that deeply resonant. It's just, I mean, I could sit here and go around the room and tell you when that moment is in each one of these authors' books, because I love that moment.
Well,
so
I'll give all the audience a heads up. I'm going to try and save time for, we did prepare some book recommendations, and we have actually a longer list. We're not gonna be able to get into all of them, but I hope the Keller Public Library is gonna be sending you through the email. And once you get a bunch of book lovers together, and authors are certainly book lovers, we can start talking about books and never stop. So I'm gonna just put a pin in that, and we will get back to it in just a minute. So going back to our idea about talking about how to introduce romance to bigger and greater audiences, I thought I'd ask each of you, what's one thing that you wish a non-romance reader would know about romance as a genre? And I'll go backwards. Ophelia, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll go. I think there's always great stories. I mean, if you look at a cover and you roll your eyes, that's, it's so unfair because, I want to get a hold of this book, the Almost to Scandal, and see the touching through the thing. I mean, I'm gonna make fun of myself a little bit because when we were asked about some favorite books, I wrote Twilight, because Twilight, it is what it is, but what it was for me at the time that it came out, it pretty much changed my life. And you can talk to a lot of authors around my generation, and we all kind of, I don't know if we were all like, well, I can do that, because it wasn't written all that great, but the story and the characters were just like zing, zing, zing. And that got me to want to write as well. And, there's the Meadow moment in that stupid book where he puts his ear to her heart. I mean, I think romance gets a bad rap of just being, Fabio on the cover. And I'm speaking, I guess, for historical romances mostly, but my husband has a hard time cheering me on in front of his guy friends. Oh, she writes romance novels. But I mean, I cry over my characters too, just like Elizabeth does. And I think that there's real heart and really great stories in every romance that I've ever read. I wish they would know that.
Lorraine, what would you add to that question?
I think,
Well, as someone who wouldn't read romance novels because I thought I knew what happened in them, and I ended up reading one by mistake. I didn't realize it was a romance novel when I picked it up to read it. I would like for readers to, what surprised me was the depth of emotion and the relationship. And so I've always really seen them more as books about relationships, people falling in love, overcoming obstacles to have their happily ever after. And so, so for me, I always see romance novels more as relationship stories.
Good.
Roni?
sorry, I thought you said my name, so I jumped in.
Yeah, you guys do, those names do sound a lot alike.
I think where I kind of try to explain it to people who don't read it is a lot of us love romantic movies, right? Or if you're of my generation, like somebody mentioned Dawson's Creek, right? And Felicity and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all of those shows we grew up loving. The huge reason we loved a lot of those is because there's a romance in it. And usually there's like a slow burn romance and it's like multiple seasons. Or if you love Nora Ephron movies, all of these things, like they're all romances. So I don't see why we can go see rom-coms and not have kind of like that shame about it. And then all of a sudden it's in a book and it's like, oh, we don't read that, or that's silly or that's fluffy or whatever. So for people who I think are a little afraid of it, I usually just say kind of ease into one it's not necessarily the primary romance. Like if you're like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's in my list of recommendations, but reading Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris, you have romance in it, but you also get your vampires and your action stuff that you can kind of be familiar. It feels familiar, but then you also get the romance. And I think that's what Twilight did for a lot of people too, is like, I'm just going to read, a YA vampire story. And it's like, oh, this is a love story. And let me find out there's all these other books with that. So I think a lot of people who think they don't like romance actually really do. They just haven't given it a chance in book form. So.
Great. Elizabeth, what do you think people should know?
I think people should know that no matter what you like or where you are or where you start, there's a romance out there for you. There's such a wide variety of voices. There's such a wide variety of authors with different experiences. There are authors of color. There are disabled authors. There are authors who, all of them, bring their own passion to tell this love story, to tell this story about a relationship, no matter what kind of a relationship you want, male, female, female, male, male, and a female. Whatever you want, the way you like your cup of coffee, we will serve it to you. We'll give it to you. Have something for everyone. I promise you, we can find something that you're going to love, that's going to speak to your heart and give you some ease. And I think that is the second thing. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go with two things. You can explore all sorts of themes in a romance because we promise you it's going to be okay at the end. We can, every single author here writes in a different subgenre or a different little portion. Lorraine and I share historical, but we're in different periods, but we all promise you we're going to make it okay at the end. And you can experience some things and learn some things in the world that you might not have known before, but we promise you it's going to be okay.
I love that. Krystal, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, what everybody said was great. And I loved Elizabeth, you know, like there's a flavor for everybody out there. There are just anything you could imagine. There's all different kinds. There's the slow burn, there's the fast burn, there's the adventure action movie with some romance in there too. And you just have to give it a shot. And I really loved what she ended with we promise a happy ever after. Like, that's, for me, that's a kicker for reading other genres, because I'm like, where am I gonna land? Oh, they died. Okay, well, I mean, it was a good story, but they died. Like, I really, really appreciate the promise that romance is like, you're going to land on solid footing, no matter how hard we torture you along the way. And some people torture worse than others. That is also true. But like, you're going to land in a really good place, and you're going to have those feels, and it's about the relationship, and it's about the loyalty and the commitment. And I love seeing that. That's a huge thing for me in romance, is seeing that the loyalty to your partner, the commitment to your partner, that really strong bond that is created in a romance is really important to me.
Yeah, I mean, I made the question, so I knew what my answer was going to be, but y'all covered it, of course. I mean, and it was never more important than this last year, right? The last 12 months, I needed those happy endings. I needed that promise of hope and redemption, and that there was better days were going to come. And I needed that more than ever. And romance was there to give it to me. Yeah. And I had to keep and I would have people, they know I love books, they would recommend books to me. Someone even was like, there's this great book about a pandemic you should read. And I go, no, I am not reading about pandemics in a pandemic. I will put that recommendation aside. For me personally, it was not what I needed for my mental health. I needed two people banter. I needed, some of them solving mysteries, some of them, kissing, and just at the end, everything works out. So I hope I can see by everyone that we all needed that as well last year. So one of you, I forget which one now, maybe it was Elizabeth, mentioned that we all write different subgenres. And I was really thrilled when Anne sent out the list of who was going to be on this panel, because I thought, oh, that is really cool that we've got all these slightly different viewpoints on the genre. So I thought it would be fun to go around and you can explain maybe what your subgenre is, and maybe try and sell it. Like, sell what your subgenre is and why you think maybe it offers the best type of romance. Krystal?
Oh,
go back round. You get to start off.
Okay. All right. Well, I write a romance with magic, and I like shifters. So werewolves are way up there at the top of the list, but I don't stop there. I've got shifter dragons, I've got shifter lions, I've got shifter wool, all they're all predators though. There are no
Mongo
shifter
shifters.
sheep. So I really like in my flavor, I really like that alpha kind of animal instinct in the male character. My females are usually tough and smart, and they know what they want, and there's usually a lot of action. I have lots of kidnappings and people getting chased and stolen, or there's villains. I do a lot of big bad villains over a series. Like they'll finally beat the villain at the end of the series. So I really build a lot of kind of the fantasy. There's a lot of fantasy,
So
and they are spicy.
just to interrupt you a little bit. So if someone out there is saying, "Oh, that sounds really good," what would they, and they wanted to go to their librarian, ask for Krystal Shannan and more of that, what would they call that?
You would want to look up paranormal romance,
Okay.
or fantasy romance. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thanks.
And what do you think your readers are drawn to paranormal or fantasy romance? What do you think they're coming to you for? Like what? That might be like PhD level.
I mean, an escape.
We might need to go to the psychologist down there for that. Sorry.
I feel like if you just need an escape from reality, that this is a good place to go into another world, because it's, like Twilight, like it's a completely different reality of rules. The rules are just very different.
Sounds amazing right now.
Yes.
I want to go.
I like it.
Elizabeth, what's your subgenre and why should we like it?
I write historical romance based period and slightly earlier in the Georgian period, but I don't write sort of Bridgerton drawing room romance. I write mostly adventure romance. I'm going to take you out on an adventure, and that's what I think is a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed rereading those kinds of books this year because I've been at home and I haven't been able to go anywhere by choice, but I've been armchair traveling through adventure romance, and I think it's just a marvelous genre to experience things you wouldn't get to experience otherwise. I know I looked at some of the recommendations, and there's some historical mysteries on here by Deanna Rayburn, which I also read this year and just adored sort of the adventure of those. So I really like the adventure. There you go.
Yeah.
She had one, I forget which one. I was the one that made that recommendation. So she had one where they go to a castle on an island.
That's my favorite.
Was the best
and
thing
I think it's a perilous,
perilous undertaking? No.
It's up here on a shelf and I can't, dang it.
But I was like, I get to go to a castle on an island, and it's like the best castle in the world. Y'all have to read it.
It's marvelous. Yeah. But it was an adventure, and I really enjoy adventure. That's what I liked.
I do too.
Amazing. And Roni?
So I write a little bit of a couple of things. So I started an erotic romance. So if we're kind of in the 50 Shades zone of steam, that's where my other one series is. And then I wrote a series with 4 women who had been through a school shooting as teenagers. And then, the stories are about them as adults, kind of where they're at now and how they're overcoming it, and falling in love and, getting past that. So kind of emotional contemporary romance. And then my current series that's coming out next week is it's contemporary romance, but with like a wink towards rom-com. So a little more humor, a little lighter. But I would say what I write the most on all three of those is because that therapy background, I can't seem to like give anybody a light backstory. So everybody's got like really emotional backstories, or like my heroine in the next book, she has Tourette's. So she's dealing with social anxiety from Tourette's. And so I think why I write is I like showing people who have overcome a lot of things or who are dealing with things that everyday people deal with, but that can still get their happy ending. I had a mom contact me this week she was a book blogger who had read the book, and her son just got diagnosed with Tourette's. So she was saying how nice it was to be, seen in the book and to feel like, you can still get a happy ending. And my son has Tourette's too. So full disclosure, I have experience with it, but so I think that's why I write. When I get those letters, I'm like, yes, that's what does it for me. So I think that's no matter what genre I'm in, it's emotional romance is what I would say. So
That's amazing. So do you think, and you and I have talked about this before, and I think we share an interest in helping readers kind of understand what it is they're looking for from a book. So if someone wanted to go to a library and wanted to read books like yours, do you think calling it emotional contemporary romance or issue-based contemporary romance, what would you recommend?
yeah, I don't know if there's a label for it. I kind of learned the authors that like if you want emotional romance, Colleen Hoover usually does really emotional romances. Like you just kind of have to find your way through, but you can usually tell from covers if you're looking in contemporary romance, if it's like cartoony, especially right now with the cartoony kind of covers, you're going to get more rom-com. Like I showed my cover earlier, I'm really not trying to sell my book, but just showing the difference in the cover. Yeah. It's not quite cartoony, and there's like clouds in front of her face showing that there's some sort of, so those little clues can sometimes tell you, but sometimes it just takes reading the back cover and kind of getting a feel for the author, because you don't know if you're going to get really light or really, I wouldn't call mine heavy. I would just say emotional. And then also they're all steamy. So if you're looking for sweet, that is not my books. So yeah, go to those.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Something for everybody. That's the thing, right?
Exactly. Lorraine, what do you love about your subgenre?
So my subgenre is historical romance set in the Victorian period. And one of the things that I love about the Victorian period is that it provides me with such a broad canvas. If I want to write a darker story, then I go to the 1850s during the Victorian era. And if I want to write something a little bit lighter, then I'll go to the 1880s. And so I have a wide range that I can choose from. And the history during that time is so fascinating to me, because it's when the industrialization was really getting going and things were moving towards modernization. And so while it is historical, it also has, you can see the attitude of people changing, the aristocracy was changing. So there's a lot of changes that take place during this period that allows me to have stories that I always try and find an aspect of history that people might not be particularly familiar with. And I try and include that in my stories. And I like to have twists. The story doesn't always go where you think it's going to go. But it's just, I love doing research and I love history. And so for me, historical romance is what brought me to romance. That's how I started reading romance, was reading historical romance. So it became my first love. I do read all the genres though, contemporary, paranormal, just everything, because as was stated earlier, for me, it's the relationship, it's the happy ever after that you're always going to find. And I just find, I love everything about romance. So, but if you're looking for history or my stories are emotional. I love to torture my heroes, so I usually give them really awful childhoods. And it's just, but if you were looking for my books, you would just look under historical romance or Victorian romance.
I love learning things in historical romance too. And Victorian, I mean, Victoria was queen for how many years? So you say a Victorian era, you could have a very wide range of things that are happening in that time.
I think like 1837 to 1901. So yeah, exactly. I mean, there's just so much you can pick from.
Ophelia, tell us about your subgenres.
So
mine's like genres because I think you're starting to branch out a little bit.
Yeah, so I write contemporary. I write all contemporary. So my editor and I like to call it the cleansing of the palate. So you've got all these other authors with their steamy, sticky, yummy love scenes, and then mine are clean. They're sweet. They're called sweet. So
the only things sticky in your books are like the spoon that they're using to make a pudding.
Yeah. Sticky. Well, I have a whole series that takes place in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So chocolate is sticky. And there are chocolate fights because why would it be set in Hershey otherwise? Yes.
That's fantastic.
And poisonous mushrooms. So I write women's fiction, contemporary category romances, which are kind of the ones that have the, oh, sorry, there's a party going out outside. That kind of have the formulaic, but of course they all have their happily ever after. So we all like to torture our heroes, I think, and torture our characters, knowing that, but the last chapter is when it all comes together and they ride off into the sunset. I also write cozy mysteries. And if you don't know what that is a mystery that's usually got, I'm saying usually, it's usually got a female heroine who is not a police officer, not a detective, but somehow dead bodies keep finding their way to her feet and she has to somehow solve the problem. I love cozies. I've only written one just because I kind of got a bad contract with that first one, but I would love to write more cozies and I love to read cozies. My latest series are set in Amish country with Amish characters. They're not for Amish people to read. They're for us to read.
Romance is huge.
I know. So this, I'll tell you a funny story. This is how this kind of came to be. So I took about a 3-year hiatus right after I got married. I was kind of burned out. I'd published 13 books real fast. And so I just took a break. I didn't read romance. I didn't write I didn't write anything at all. And I didn't keep track of what was going on. And so I finally decided it was time to start writing again. So I called my editor and I'm like, so what's popular right now? What's in? And we talked a little bit about what was out first. And at my publishing house, like their bread and butter are the billionaire romances, like the big alpha businessman that grabs her and kisses her and they sail off to do this. And she's like, we can't sell those to save our lives. And I'm like, who just got voted in as president? People hate billionaires. And it was just so interesting how that whole genre for a while was dead. And I said, well, then what is popular? And she said, have you ever heard of Amish romances? And I have a sister who lives in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is right by Lancaster County. So I've been out to Amish country quite a bit. And I'm like, well, like for Amish people to read? And she's like, anyway, so Harlequin has been doing Amish for years. And if you go to your Target or your Walmart, you'll see probably a dozen Amish romances there, the Amish secret baby, but it's so interesting. So and my publishing company really wanted an Amish book, and she's like, the president of the company is dying to have an Amish book, just dying, but we can't find an author. And I'm like, I'm the author, because it's like, there is sex in my books, but it's always off the page, like way off the page, or it's like happening after the epilogue, so we never see it. And my editors are always like, why aren't they having sex? Why aren't they having sex? And so now I'm like, I'm the author. There's no sex in these books. They like show ankles and touch pinkies, and they do more. They make out and stuff in my books. But anyway, so it's been so fun writing Amish. And I did a lot of research, and all my research was done with a, grain of salt, because, the excommunicated Amishes are the ones that always get the microphone. So anyway, they've been really fun to write, but they're very long because they're print books, and so they have to look heavy on the shelf. So they're like the longest books I've ever written. And my newest one is going to be out in April, and I'm really excited. And what was the question?
You're telling us about
I'm
your genre?
selling it, yes. So sweet romances aren't, I think sweet romances are for everyone. If you just kind of like, oh, I'm so overcome with all the sex and the haystacks, and you just want to read a cute little love story to just kind of cleanse yourself, I'm your girl.
But I mean,
I always think of the sweet as like Hallmark movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Hallmark romances, which
exactly.
are just great.
I mean, they're not all of mine are set in the countryside or whatever. That's usually one of the imprints that I write for. It's all small town, but I've written some that don't take place in small town, but it's, family oriented, big families, old barns, whatever.
But this makes me so happy because we've literally gone full circle. We started with
erotica,
wolf shifters, and we've gone through Victorian ages, 21st century, emotional romance, and then we bring it on back to small town Amish, and if you can't find something in this spectrum that we have just talked about that will make you happy, we'll stay here. We'll keep talking until
and if you need something specific, like just ask one of us, because
one of us will write it.
Find it. We can find it or write it.
Yes. Yeah. Which brings me, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but it does bring me to the recommendations that we prepared. And like I said, we provided those to Anne, and hopefully she'll be able to send those out. But we've got 2 whole pages, and we're not going to go through all of them. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time to do that. But we did a list for a recommendation for a beginner romance author, which you do not have to be a beginner to take any of these recommendations. They were just what we thought would be a good start for someone who was brand new to the genre. Let's see, we also all picked a recommendation that was one of our all-time favorite romance recommendations. And then because I knew that a lot of us had been reading, our reading preferences probably went a little cuckoo in the last 12 months, I said just your favorite book you read during COVID quarantine, and it didn't have to be romance. And there's still some romances and romance adjacent books in there, which are also good places to start. But, and definitely, I think I will be adding to my reading list by looking at those. But I think, I'm sorry?
Yeah, me too.
I was saying I loved reading this because there's some things that I haven't, they're not even on my radar. So it's marvelous to get new recommendations.
Well, and there's some that I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard that one recommended so many times. And, because there's just so many. And if you're in the book world, you sometimes lose track of who told you what when. In fact, one of the books I read over quarantine, I told a friend of mine, I'm like, oh, I finally got to that book. You said it was one of your favorite Jen Cruzy books ever. And she's like, I've never told you that.
What was it? I love her.
Well, I did too. I loved the book. I thought she had recommended Manhunting to me, and I loved Manhunting. And so when I told her that, she's like, oh, okay, I'll read that too. In fact, I could go on and on about that. But anyway, so I thought kind of most straightforward is we could all go through, and I'll read them off if you don't have the list there, but what your all-time favorite romance recommendation is. I'll tell you what you said. And if you want to change or add to it, you can. But just kind of say what it's about and why it affected you or why you loved it to include it on the list. Okay? All right. So let's see. We'll go with Ophelia, and I'll go last because since I'm moderating, I picked two. Okay. Ophelia, you picked Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, and I just noticed we had a
duplicate. There's two of us.
Yeah, so we'll go back to back for that one and see what y'all agree upon.
I don't know. It's like I can't even talk about it, or I'll talk about it all day. It's so good. And I don't even know. I read it so long ago. I don't even know who told me about it or who suggested it. But oh my gosh, it's and when you explain it, it sounds awful. It's time travel. Well, it doesn't sound awful to romance writers. It's time travel. It's in Scotland, and a British nurse, and she goes through a time warp when some witches are out. I mean, I don't even know. But these two, the character that she finds on the other side of this time warp is so wonderful and strong and beautiful. And you talk about a backstory that will break you in half. Mm-hmm. And then it's so good. I don't know what else to say about it, especially since somebody else.
Roni, Roni picked it too. What do you have to say about it?
All of those things she said. I think because I remember nothing these days. My memory is shot. So like I think there's a Nora Ephron book called I Remember Nothing. I feel her on that. So if I can remember a book, if I can remember details from a book and it sticks with me a long time, and Outlander has never left. So that's why I think it's always stayed. It's got so many elements and it feels so epic. And I think my favorites always end up having that feel like you spend so much time with the characters. Like I rarely am going to pick a favorite that's a really short book, even though, I don't write huge epic books. I write normal size books, but like there's something about spending so much time with a couple that like it stays with you. And that one always has stayed with me.
And have both of y'all watched the series? That's another book that was adapted for television and has become a huge hit. Have y'all watched the series, and what do you think of that?
It's good. Very good.
Yeah, I'm not all caught up. I think we've watched the first season. It's very hard with a kid at home to watch that one. We get this much time before bed to watch TV.
Close your eyes.
So yeah, we have to divvy that out.
I think it's been a really, I haven't gotten to the end of it either, but I think it's been a very faithful adaptation from what I've seen. I mean, as faithful as you can make it. And so if you've seen the show and you like it, go ahead and read the book because
the book's so good.
You'll like it too. Lorraine, you selected for your all-time favorite romance recommendation, you selected Love on My Mind by Tracy, is it Livesay?
Livesay, yeah.
Why did you pick that one?
I picked that one. The hero is very geeky. And I just was really drawn to the hero, and I'm trying to remember. I'm drawing a blank on. He has a condition, but anyway, and it's why he's very he isolates himself. He doesn't socialize with people, and the heroine is. She's supposed to help get him out of his shell. And part of it is I just I just love the story. It's also a biracial. The heroine is a person of color, and the way that Tracy handles her stories, it's a romance, and it's just a story about two people, And so even though, if you see, I have it on ebook, so I don't have the cover to show you, but if you see it, it's just two people falling in love, and I loved it.
Yeah.
So
Tracy writes really, it's gonna sound dumb, but you feel like they're personal, like they're the emotional contemporary romance where you're like, I could know those people, except they're way sexier than anyone I know.
What I think I love about that book is the emotional honesty of the characters too. It's just they're kind of out there for you, and I loved that about it. That
Well, and I haven't read, Elizabeth, your pick, but I think they might have some similarities there from what I've always had this list on my TV. Your book, which is Flowers from the Storm by Laura Kinsale.
This is a 1992 book, so this is pretty old.
It's been recommended so many times to me as being a very emotional book. Is that correct? I mean, is that why you
have Julia Quinn recommending it originally in the book itself? Flowers from the Storm
was like 12, probably.
Yeah. It's a historical romance set in the vaguely sort of turn of the 18th century. It's a story about a mathematical genius who is a very bad person, stroke. And he is helped through his difficulty with language and his aphasia and his all of the physical manifestations of the stroke inside this genius mathematical mind by a young Quaker woman. And there's some deceptions that he goes through in order to stay with her and keep her in his life. But the ending of this book is a master class in every kind of raw emotional honesty. And it's absolutely stunningly beautiful to me. And I think Kinsale's language is so lovely and lyrical and moving. And every time I read this book, even though I know it's going to be okay, and I think that helps that I can reread it because I know it's going to be okay, because oh my goodness, what a ringer it puts you through. I just adore it. It's the best.
I'll move that up my TBR list.
I'll send it to you.
No, not your original copy.
It's autographed.
I'll look it up at the library.
It's autographed.
Yeah, no, don't send that to me. Krystal, your pick was, I'm going to say this wrong, Acheron by Sherilyn Kenyon, which I think I've read, but it's not the first one in the series, is it?
No.
Okay.
So Acheron is kind of, he's in the world of her big long series, but his book is kind of a standalone, but in the world. That's kind of how it works, because you don't have to have read all the books to read Acheron.
Okay, that's good to
yeah, and then she wrote his brother Styx, so there's two standalone, but you still don't have to have read one to the other. But Acheron is my favorite. I'm a history, ancient mythology, like nerd person. And so Acheron is like crack. It's got all the pantheon and Atlantis and the Greek gods and the magic and the really tortured, sexy alpha hero who let's talk about going through the ringer. Acheron is dark. There's some really bad stuff that he has to work through, and the heroine that Sherilyn gave him is just so strong and so phenomenal, and it's an emotional wreck that you just can't look away from. And then it lands in one of the most beautiful places. Like, I can't even, I reread it every year. It's like 800 pages. It's huge. So be prepared. But I have never found another one that I love more than that. Just their relationship and the way he doesn't want her, and he's like, nobody wants me and my pain and my mess, and it's just
Well, that actually reminds me of one of my recommendations. Like I said, I picked two. I couldn't help myself. One historical and one urban fantasy. And my historical all-time favorite romance, and this was really hard because y'all, I've got like five.
I know, it was really hard to pick.
Right after this. But Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase.
Like my number 2.
Yeah. Is one of those two where the hero is so like, well, but it's emotional, but it's also slightly comic because he thinks that people don't want him because he's ugly, but he's not. But but there's just like twists and turns, and I've reread this book so many times because the way that she twists on a dime, you think the book went one way, and then you're like, oh, it's going off that way. And we thought it would took this turn, and then she gets a gun and shoots him, and you're like, what just happened? And that's, I hope that doesn't spoil anything for anyone, but there are scenes in this book that are so iconic, and all you have to do if you see another romance person, you'd be like, she shot him, and they will probably know what book you're talking about. There's
Nice.
it's just one of those things, and I've reread it as a reader and as an author to be like, how does this work? What's the mechanics behind this? And I'm not talking about a naughty watch. I am talking about how she put that together. And the same thing with the other book I picked, which was Burn for Me by Ilona Andrews, which is the first in this urban fantasy romance series they did. And technically, it's probably not a standalone. You're going to have to read all 3 books in the trilogy to get your happy ending. But again, they are masters. Ilona and Gordon Andrews are a writing team. And it's kind of the same thing where I've reread it so many times. It's action adventure. It's big, strong alpha hero. It's magic. But at the core of it is a story about a woman wanting to protect her family and her way of life. And so you use all these other magic systems and romance and big world building just to tell a story about a woman who's discovering her own power and wants to protect her family. And again, that's kind of what we keep coming back to in this discussion, which has been so great, you guys. It's about how romance can be used to tell all these other stories that resonate with us so deeply. And that's, I think that might be it. Do we have any other wise words of wisdom, Anne Flanoy from Keller Public Library? I don't know.
Y'all are the experts, and I definitely defer to y'all on the wise words of wisdom. But I just want to say I've really enjoyed this, especially the whole tie into the Something for Everyone. I feel like that's very on message for the Keller Library. But I have to say that I personally I'll read anything. I don't focus my reading on romance in any particular way, but I agree with everything that y'all have said tonight. There's so many times tonight I found myself saying, yes, that is what I want the patrons to know when they're like, oh, this is on the romance aisle. I don't want to read that. And just give it a chance. Like, just because it's on the romance aisle doesn't mean anything. But I do want to say, Roni, you said something in particular that I really, I just want to tell people so much, is that romance in particular, you can really trust the covers of romance novels. More than any other genre, you can tell what's in that book based on what the cover looks like. And so when people are browsing in the romance aisle, I'm always telling them, look at the cover of the book. It will give you a very good indication of what subgenre that falls into. And I was talking about this with Lindsay. I think the romance genre in particular, it's so wide. Like, it's almost not fair to call it one genre, because if you look at paranormal romance and erotica, and then you get down to the Amish romance, like, they're so varied. The only thing that they share in common really is that love story or the happy ending. I do believe that there really is something for everyone in the genre, and I always encourage people to go for it. So I really appreciate hearing all of y'all's thoughts on that.
You want us to go for another hour, hour and a half?
I feel like we could, yeah.
I love this topic.
The best, my favorite.
Well,
Yeah.
I know me and everybody at the library really appreciates all of the authors joining us tonight and giving up your time to speak with us. And hopefully we can do it again sometime. It's
Yeah.
Love to.
That's
Yeah.
it. We love the readers.
Thanks so much for having us.
We appreciate it.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Stay tuned at the Keller Library. We're always hosting events like this. Especially now we're doing everything on Zoom, so they're all open to everybody. So
Nice. That's awesome.
hi everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Stay
Thank
safe.
you.